But we're going to continue our conversation tonight. You guys can open up to Genesis 4. That's where we're going to be in just a minute. But what we're going to talk about tonight is this question, all right? So creation and the fall, what we're talking about is this question. Why must God judge sin? Why must God judge sin, all right? So let me ask you this question to get started. What does it mean to judge something or to judge someone? Somebody help me out with a definition here.
Oh, I have a question.
All right, give me your question.
Here last week.
Okay.
What did we learn about last week?
So last week, great question. We talked about what the world is that God has made, what the purpose of it is, why God made it perfect, right? And the fact that sin is what has corrupted our whole existence. It's affected our bodies, our minds, right? And it's affected the very soil that we walk on, all right? That was last week's conversation. Thanks for making sure you're up to speed there. So when it comes to judging somebody, what does that mean? Or judging something? Looking for the negatives. I like that, right? So it's kind of like when I'm thinking about judging somebody or I'm thinking about judging a situation, I'm like focusing almost exclusively on what's bad. Okay? I throw a hand over here. Dean. Questioning something, all right? So maybe I'm asking what their motives were, right? What they meant by that. And, okay, so that's part of judging. Somebody else.
Your own opinion on something?
It's your opinion on something. Interesting. Okay? Somebody else. Judging. Sarah.
I mean, it can be good or bad. Depends how you look at it.
Yeah, it could be good or bad, right? So what we're doing, you guys, ultimately, when it comes to whatever the reasons are, whatever our motives are, when we are judging something or someone, we are making what's called a value judgment, right? We're esteeming whether something is good or it is bad. We're declaring something good or bad. And that's why it's problematic, right? When we sit and judge people, we're doing something that we're not supposed to do, right? We're saying that somebody is good or bad based on, you said it was an opinion, right? It's something that is in my own opinion. Like I'm looking at somebody and saying they are good or they are bad, and that is not always a fair thing to do, right? But why do we do that? Like, isn't that kind of like natural? Don't you kind of do that yourself, right? When you see somebody do something dumb, right? You make a judgment in your head, right? Like, oh, that person's dumb, right? Okay? And you see somebody do something sinful, right? Oh, that was bad. That person's bad. Right? We automatically do that, okay? So what I want to do tonight as we think about this is understand that we all have a sense of good and evil, don't we? Right? In our hearts, in our brains, right? Every single one of us in this room, we all have a sense of good and evil, and I will prove it to you in this way, all right? Let's say that you are down at our local ice cream haunt down here, right? You can either pick your favorite one, Rita's or Dippy's over here right around the corner, okay? And you're there, you're waiting in line, right? And it's the first day of spring, right? At Rita's, if that's your one, right? And it's free water ice, right? And the line is like around the parking lot in like coils and circles and weird shapes because there's like 600,000 people there waiting to get their free first day of spring water ice, right? And it's your turn, right? You're about to get your water ice, and somebody steps in front of you and takes your place in line. All right? Good or bad?
Bad.
Bad. Why? Who says? Who says? Me? Yeah. Me says? Okay? You have a sense of what is good and what is wrong. All right? You have a sense of what is good and what is wrong. How about this? We're playing Gaga soccer on a youth group night.
Oh no.
All right? We're having a great time, right? And half of the people in this room refuse to play that because it's like a deadly sport. Okay? But all right, say you're one of the few that are playing Gaga soccer, right? And you're coming up against Jay Fred, right? Jay Frederick is blocking the net, okay? And he's ready to go. And Lucas, you unwind and you shoot the ball at him, right? And you saw it graze his calf there, right? You saw the ball change direction, right? Jay Fred says, I didn't get hit. All right? Good or bad?
Bad.
Bad, all right? He's cheating. He's cheating, right? Jay Fred cheats all the time. No, I'm just kidding. He's not that guy. Right? But you've all been there, right? You're playing a game. Okay, maybe you're a gamer at home, like you play Monopoly with your family or something like that, right? And you're coming towards the end, and all of a sudden you realize that your brother has all this like huge stack of pink 50s, and you're like, dude, where did all those pink 50s come from? I know you didn't pass go that many times, right? And here he's been siphoning them off from the bank, right? He's been putting them away, and now he's ready to buy Park Place, right? Okay, that's a problem, all right? He's cheating, okay? Right or wrong? I'm sorry. What edition of Monopoly are you playing, babe? Yeah. All right. Mine, they were pink, okay? They were pink in my edition of Monopoly, okay? Here's the thing. You cheat at a game, that's wrong. We all know that, don't we? Why? Because there are rules according to the game or something much bigger than that, okay? How about you're at school, all right? And you have some cash in your pocket for pizza day, right? It's pizza day at school, okay? And you're going in and you're going to get your pizza and you reach into your pocket and you're a couple dollars short. All right? And you realize it's not because you have a hole in your pocket. It's because the guy who sits behind you in class took the dollar bill you dropped out of your pocket. All right? Good or bad? Bad, right? Stealing. It's stealing. He took your money that you were going to get pizza on pizza day, right? And now you can't, okay? We all have a sense, you guys, of what is right and wrong, okay? And there's levels to this, right? Like, in some cases with stealing, right, it's the law of the land, okay? Like, obviously it's wrong because our government and because our schools and things say so, okay? But when it comes down to, like, somebody cutting in line, you know, we still have this moral judgment that we make instantly. That's wrong. That is not fair that that person took my place in line. That was my right, okay? And the reason why, you guys, is simply this, okay? We've been talking about being made in God's image, all right? We have a strong sense of what's right and what's wrong because we've been given God's image. We have a God-given standard of what is right and wrong in our hearts, okay? Every single one of us, whether a believer or not, has that standard in their hearts, all right? Now, sin twists it, sin perverts it, sin changes it, okay? But ultimately, we all have this sense of what is right and what's wrong, okay? Now, to discuss this a little bit, answering this question, why must God judge sin? We're going to look at the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4 to help illustrate this, all right? And we're going to say 3 things about why God must judge sin, okay? Because, again, we have this sense of what is right and wrong. Therefore, it comes from God, and therefore, God is the one who judges right and wrong ultimately. But there are 3 reasons why, okay? And here's the first one. God is holy. All right, God is holy. Let's look at this story of Cain and Abel, and then unpack this a little bit. So Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 says this: Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. All right, so they have a baby. All right, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. Okay? And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. But the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. All right? Let's pause there. I think we all know what's about to happen here, unfortunately. But let's pause there and talk about the holiness of God. When I say that God is holy, what does the word holiness mean to you? Okay? Christine? Set apart. Awesome. Perfect definition of holy, right? Set apart. What else does that, when you think of God being holy, though, like what kind of images does that give you? How would you define that maybe a little in kind of like our own terms? Hannah? Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. When I think of God being holy, I think of God being perfect. You know, without blemish, right? Flawless, pure. All right? Somebody else give me something. When it comes to God's holiness, what's another word that you might use in connection with that? Anybody? Sarah?
Good.
Good, yeah, right? He is good, okay? And we know, that God, when we talked about creation last week, or 2 weeks ago, that God calls his things that he made good, right? But they are but, the imprint of his goodness, right? And they are now broken by sin. But God is good, and that is part of his holiness, all right? So when we talk about him being holy, we are saying that he has what is, in a big term, is moral excellence, all right? That goodness, right? That perfection, all right? He is morally excellent. Morals are like good and bad things, right? He is good. He is good. He is morally excellent, okay? And he is set apart from all others. So I found a picture that I think illustrates this idea a little bit, all right? Holiness, as Christiane said, means being set apart. What's different about that ball? It's red, okay? And it's outside of the group, right? It's set apart from the group, okay? Simple illustration, but here's the thing. God is... He is markedly different than us, okay? God is though we bear his image, he is so different from us. He is so far above us. He is holy, set apart, and his goodness is supreme and eternal, right? He is always good. He is always holy, okay? Because of that, you guys, we see in this passage that God is worthy of being worshipped, don't we? What are Cain and Abel doing? As they get older, what are they doing? What did we just read? They're bringing an offering to the Lord, okay? Who told them they were supposed to bring an offering to the Lord? No one. Who? No one. Who told Cain and Abel they were supposed to bring an offering to the Lord?
Their parents, I think.
Yeah, right? Adam and Eve, their parents, okay? Why would Adam and Eve have a sense, okay, because remember, what I want us to remember is this is before Moses, right? This is before the law. This is before the nation of Israel, where there's this whole regulated form of sacrifice and bringing animals and stuff. So when we read that there's this sacrifice happening here, it's not like that kind of sacrifice. It's something different, okay? And Adam and Eve have taught their kids because they walked with God in the garden, right? They remember what it was like to be with God, in perfection, in holiness, right, before they fell into sin. And now on the other side of this, they remember, hey, God, when we sinned and God kicked us out of the garden, God actually killed an animal to clothe us, right? An animal died and gave us the skins so that we could be covered. Our shame wouldn't be revealed, right? And so they recognized that God is worthy of a sacrifice, right? God is worthy of being worshipped in this way, all right? And so because he's holy, he's worthy of worship, okay? And they're bringing these sacrifices because Adam and Eve have taught their sons that this is how we worship this living God, right? Because he is holy and we are not, okay? But what I also see here is this. Because he is holy, God is the one who's capable of properly defining and calling sin, sin, okay? Do you see that in verse 7? It says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Do you know this is the first place this word sin appears? Okay, you would think it would be in Genesis chapter 3 because that's where the first sin occurs, right? We see the rebellion of Adam and Eve there. But it's not till here that God actually labels what this wrongdoing is, right? That to rebel against God is sin. Okay? And because he's holy, he's the one who's capable of calling something evil and calling something good. Ryan, what's your question?
I don't feel like the biggest sin is the biggest sin ever committed. I think the biggest sin ever committed was the sin that tore nature apart from God.
That could be true. What sin were you contrasting that with? Okay. Yeah, so there's a huge, rebellion that happens in the garden, right? That Adam and Eve decide we're not going to listen to what God told us to do, and that act of sin is what Romans says is what condemned the world. It subjected it to futility. So that's a big sin, okay? But I think that in terms of what each and every one of us do, there's no such thing as a sin that is the sin, right? It's that our identity before we knew Christ was sinner, and that has ruined our relationship with God, and now Jesus has made it possible for us to have a renewed relationship with him. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking about, but that's kind of my immediate reaction to your comment. So thank you for that. God is the one who's capable of defining sins. Now let me ask you this question. Have you ever wondered why Cain's offering was no good? When you read this, why is his offering being rejected?
Because he's not giving his very best.
He's not giving his very best. Awesome. What were you going to say?
Because sacrifices were the firstborn, the clean animals, or sheep or cats.
Okay. Yeah, so remember, like we said, the law hasn't come yet, all right? So there's no thing that says that he can't offer vegetables or fruits, all right? But like Sarah said, there's something that it's just not his best. It's kind of like he went through his field and took, the semi-rotten, okay, I don't need to eat that, right? That's a little overdone, all right? And I'm going to take that and I'm going to offer that. That's sort of the implication here, is that he's not giving something that is costly to him, all right? And furthermore, when it comes to the offerings that are going to be regulated in the law, when Moses comes, it includes grains, it includes things of the field also, though primarily when there's some type of guilt offering, it's an animal, like you said, there's a calf or a sheep or something that's going to be used in that particular sacrifice, all right? But ultimately, Cain is trying to approach God on his own terms. Okay? He has a hard and rebellious heart, and he is trying to approach God on his own terms. Now, what's really interesting, I don't know if we talked about this when we looked at the fall in Genesis 3, but when Satan is tempting Eve, do you guys remember what he says to her? He's like, did God really say? And she's like, yes, this is what God said. And he says, you will not surely die. He says, for God knows that in the moment that you eat of the fruit, you will be like God. That's what Satan says. You will be like God. Now let me ask you a question. As Christians, is not our goal to be like God?
It is.
Isn't that what our goal is? I want to be like Jesus. I want to model him. I want to be as close to him as possible. So what's wrong with Satan saying if you eat the fruit, you'll be like God? Isn't that our goal? Right.
Because it's a lie.
It's a lie. Is it?
Because God said not to.
Okay, yeah. So obviously it's a very direct violation of a rule God gave. But isn't Satan telling them it'll produce a good thing? Like, are they doing something wrong to produce something good? Is that what's going to happen here? I think the answer is no, obviously. And the reason why is this, okay? It's just like with Cain. Approaching God on their own terms, okay? Being like God on their own terms. Does that make sense? I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to get close to God that way. Well, let's see how that works out for you, okay? Cain says, I'm going to bring this type of offering, all right? You know, and maybe it's you know, just second quality kind of stuff, right? But what he's doing in his heart is he's saying, I'm not going to approach God the way God has commanded, or the way that I know God would desire of me, okay? I'm going to do what I want to do. And that's what Adam and Eve fell into, right? They believed Satan and said, you can do whatever you want to do, and then you'll be like God. We cannot approach God on our own terms, you guys, right? And so Cain's rebellious, arrogant, and self-serving heart is the issue here, right? And that's revealed in his offering that costs him nothing, right? He gives an offering that costs nothing. Meanwhile, Abel brings the best of his flock, and he's accepted, all right? So what I would encourage you guys to remember in this is that because God is holy, all right, God requires all of us to acknowledge our need for him and not attempt to do things on our own, all right? God requires each one of us to acknowledge our need for him in everything we do and not attempt to do things on our own. So that's the first reason why God must judge sin, okay? Because he's holy. Because he's holy, he must judge sin. All right, and the second reason is simply this. God hates sin, right? God hates sin. Look at the way that the Lord says he sort of describes the process of sin in verse 6 and 7. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it, all right? And then, look what happens, all right? So Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you walk in the ground, work in the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth. Here's what I want you guys to see. Do you see the language that God uses to describe sin? Number one, he says that it crouches at the door to master or to pounce on him, right? Like the imagery is of a wild animal. And then when he says, where's your brother? And he says, I'm not my brother's keeper. He says, what have you done? Like, do you hear the horror in that? Like, God is vehemently opposed to the acts of sin that you and I engage in, all right? God hates sin for a couple of reasons, you guys. One is that it's destructive, and the other is that it tears down, all right? And so what I'm thinking of here, another word I could use is like corrosive or something like that. Have you ever been tasked with the job of throwing out the leftovers in the fridge? Okay.
No.
You have leftovers. Okay. What's a leftover, right? If you've ever had that job, okay, you know that when you pull that thing, whatever it used to be, out of the back of the fridge, right, it's somewhat sentient. It can almost talk to you because it's growing fuzzy things, right? And it's moving a little bit, and you may need to bathe yourself in gamma radiation to get the disease off of you from touching it, okay? That's kind of what it's like, all right? You pull that thing out, right? If you eat that, you're going to die, okay? Because you've created a new life form and now you're going to eat it, okay? So here's the thing. When you throw away that moldy food, right, that food is no longer good. Why? Because the mold has ruined it, right? It's taken something that once was good, right, that was profitable to eat, that probably tasted really yummy when you first had it, right? And now it's no good to eat anymore. And sin is a little bit like the mold in that, right? It takes something good and it corrupts it. It makes it unfit to be eaten. And the other imagery in here, you guys, is that idea of like a wild animal. It says, if you do not well, in verse 7, if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. In other words, it's like a wild animal that wants to pounce, wants to catch you, wants to eat you, okay? And I think there's a reason why in the New Testament, Peter says that the devil is like a roaring lion who wanders to and fro seeking whom he may devour, right? I think there's a correlation between those two ideas, right? Sin is deadly, all right? If it catches me, if I'm unaware, it's going to eat me. It's going to kill me, all right? Satan's the same way, right? Because he's the father of sin. He's the father of lies, all right? So God hates sin because it's destructive. It's corrosive. It tears down, all right? And ultimately, sin separates man from God, right? Isn't that what happened in the garden? Sin entered, where previously man and God walked together, had this perfect and beautiful relationship, right? And sin entered, and that's broken. And now man can no longer look on the face of God because he's sinful, all right? How many of you guys have I think we had, how many snow cancellations did we have last year? Just one? Just one snow cancellation, right? I'm confession, I love lots of snow, though I don't like to cancel youth group. But when we cancel youth group, right, that is so depressing, isn't it? Like because of weather, like we can't come together, we can't play games, we can't play Gaga soccer, okay, that kind of thing, right? And when you're home, right, you're just like, man, I wish I was with my friends. I was planning on being a youth group. It's a Thursday night. Wow, terrible. Okay, I'm being deprived of something good, right? Because for whatever reason, the weather is terrible. We cannot get together and meet on a given Thursday night. All right, sin deprives us of a relationship with God, you guys. Okay. Now, what I want us to understand is this. All right, we sometimes think about sin like as like a something that God just can't be around, like it's icky to him or something like that. He doesn't want to touch it as it's gross or something. And I know we're all Marvel fans in here, right? And DC, except for Batman, is pretty lame, okay? But if you guys remember that guy with the S on his chest, all right? Superman, I think his name is, okay? And with the red tights and everything, all right? So Superman has something that is his weakness. You guys remember what it's called? Kryptonite, all right? What happens when Superman's around Kryptonite?
He's weak.
He's weak. The super strength is gone. The X-ray vision is gone. The curly Q, it flops. All right? He is no longer Superman. He is basically Clark Kent. Okay. I think sometimes we think of sin that way with God, right? Like God is like, get it away from me, right? I can't be near it. Okay. But what I want you to see is God he detests it. It is not that he cannot tolerate it. It's that he hates it. It is despicable. It is the fundamental opposite of his holy character. All right. Because God is holy. Sin is not, right? It's not that he can't be around sin. It's that he must judge it because it's disgusting to him, right? That's why he will judge sin, right? And so I think that should make us, you guys, as Christians, hear me on this. Hear me on this. If you claim to follow Jesus, all right, and what you do in your private time and your spare time when people aren't around is sinful, all right? If what you do, in maybe even in public, is sinful, right? And you think, oh, I can just do this, I can live however I want, and God doesn't care how I live my life. I got news for you. Right? God hates sin. The actions that we do as Christians should be holy and blameless the way he is holy and blameless, all right? Because sin is disgusting to God. He hates it. That's why in the book of Revelation it actually says, he's talking about specifically Christians who aren't growing in their faith. They're lukewarm, he says, but he says they're so disgusting because they're walking in a way that's not pleasing to me. I want to spew them out of my mouth. I want to vomit them out of my mouth. That's literally the language of Revelation chapter 3, all right? So when we think about the actions that we engage in on a daily basis, if they are sinful, we cannot pretend. We cannot pretend that we are pleasing God, right? He's actually disgusted with the behavior that we are engaging in, right? Now the beauty is that grace covers us, right? Our salvation cannot be broken if we placed our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, right? And so grace covers that, but the way that we should want to walk is in God's favor, right? That God is pleased with me. That when I get to heaven, he's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. You took the time that you had and used it for my glory in every scenario that you could possibly think of. Well done, right? That's what I want to hear when I get to heaven, all right? Because God hates sin and he is going to judge it, okay? So the third reason is this, all right? And it's tied to his character again, okay? And it's that he is just, all right? So we live in a civilized society, don't we, right? We don't have tribes. We don't have... we don't live around campfires all the time, although just on weekends when we pay to go away and do that, all right? We live in a civilized society. There are rules, there are laws, we have roads, okay? We're a civilized society, okay? And in a civilized society, when people do criminal activity, all right, when they engage in criminal activity, our civilized society demands that punishment should be appropriate for the crime. Okay, you guys with me on that? The punishment should fit the crime, is the idea here. Now, there are things in history, that's not new, by the way. There are things in history that demonstrate this, right? Anybody know what that is? Probably not. It is the Code of Hammurabi, right? And you may or may not have ever heard of this. You may or may not ever encounter it again. But in ancient Babylon, okay, you remember the country Babylon? They take over Israel at a certain point because they are wicked and God is going to judge them. They take them into captivity. There is a Babylonian ruler named Hammurabi, and he comes up with this code of conduct. It's called the Code of Hammurabi, all right? And his code is simply this, that when there is crime done, there is punishment that should fit the crime. This is literally the concept, all right? When there is something done that is against the law, there's judgment, there's retribution for it, and you know, this by the way is an obelisk with the laws written on it. It's very hard to see, but it's, you know, chiseled on there. And this is very well documented in history, all right? Now, we have something called the Eighth Amendment, all right? The Eighth Amendment, anybody know what document that is?
The
Constitution.
Constitution.
Ah, there we go. I was waiting for somebody to say Declaration of Independence, right? Constitution, okay? The Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment prohibits something called cruel and unusual punishments. You've heard that term before? Cruel and unusual punishments? All right, I'm taking you back to, like, you know, civics and law class and stuff here. I'm sorry. But here's the thing. The purpose of the Eighth Amendment is that where there is crime, people are not treated unfairly as a result of their crime, right? Because everybody has what we say are rights, you know, the right to a fair trial, right? The right to not endure something that is what is cruel and unusual, like torture, right? Or being imprisoned without representation or something of those nature, okay? Here's the simple point of this, all right? This stuff is not original to mankind, right? People and historians and social scientists and things like that will say, oh, look, man invented this stuff, you know, this was happening about the same time as the Bible, and so therefore the Bible just copies that stuff. No. God is the originator of this concept, right? That where there is something wrong done, there is judgment for it, and it is supposed to be just, all right? And you guys, the ultimate reality of what our wrongdoing deserves, according to Romans 6:23, is that sin equals death, all right? When we engage in sinful activity, because God is holy and just, right? Because sin is detestable to him, because he will judge sin, sin equals death, all right? Romans 6:23 says that the wages of sin is death. That means that the earnings, the ultimate outcome, right? Everything I bring in, no matter how hard I work from sin, is ultimately death. It's ultimately separation from God and destruction. Now God is the one, again, like we said, because he's holy, he's the only one who can declare what is good. He's the only one who can declare right and wrong, okay? Now what happens when Cain murders his brother is this. Let's read on a little bit, okay? So he says in verse 11, "You're cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth," right? There is an immediate consequence to Cain's actions, okay? Kills his brother, right? God actually gives him a chance to kind of come clean about it, and he says, "Now, am I my brother's keeper?" You know, evading the question kind of thing, and God says, "Here's the judgment, all right? The curse of the ground from your father Adam, right, is now worse upon you, right? Here's the judgment. You're going to be cast out from your family. You're going to be a wanderer in this open, barren world, right, where you're going to have to work for your food and survive on your own, all right? Cain is driven away because he murdered his brother, okay? There's punishment for a crime. Now, here's the thing. That actually is pretty merciful, right? That's pretty merciful in a sense, because if Cain kills a life, if there is just and equal punishment, what should happen to him? He should go to jail for a few years, right? And then, you know, be educated while he's in prison. And I'm sorry, whole other thing, okay? Right. There's death, right? There should be death for death, right? And actually, as a matter of fact, when Noah comes out of the ark, all right, after the flood, right, he stands, he makes this altar. God, you know, recommunicates like, "Oh, I'm never going to flood the earth again." And then God actually institutes something that is sort of the basis for what our criminal justice system calls capital punishment, right? Life for life, essentially. He says, where life is taken, life I shall require, all right? And so in this moment, God actually demonstrates, we're talking about in a second, a lot of mercy, right? Because he still punishes, but he doesn't exact the full payment of what is actually owed for the crime that was committed. Question?
Yeah, in verse 24,
Yeesh.
it says, "If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is
Yeah.
sevenfold." What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. So what happens is as the story goes on, it starts to talk about Cain's descendants, because he's going to have children, all right? And there's this guy who comes along, and he looks back at his great-great-great-great-grandfather Cain, and he's like, you know, if Cain was judged in this way, then man, I'm going to be even worse than Cain was. Like, he's actually taking ownership of his own sinfulness and saying, man, I'm going to be just 7 times as terrible as Cain was, right? He's actually threatening his wives. He has 2 wives. He's actually supposedly the first one who ever took 2 wives, and he's saying, "Look at me, you know, I've killed a man for wounding me and a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold, right?" He's like, "I'm a bad dude," is what he's saying, right? And I'm taking ownership of that, and nobody better mess with me, right? That's what he's saying there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Sin just gets worse and worse and worse is what the Bible is communicating there. All right? So here's the thing I want us to talk about in the last few minutes we have, and then we're going to break up for a recap, right? Romans 2 has this great breakdown of God's judgment upon sin, and there's 3 things I want us to see here, right? God's judgment of sin is just, okay? It says in Romans 2, we know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. Do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things, oh, by the way, he's referencing back to this list of evil things that happened in Romans 1, all right? Those who practice such things is what he's referencing, okay? And yet you do them yourself, that you will escape the judgment of God. Because of your hard and impenitent heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. He will render to each one according to his works. There will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek, but glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek, for God shows no partiality. What I want you to see in this is that God's judgment is just. It rightly falls. It is righteous. And God doesn't show any favoritism. Partiality means that he would prefer one over the other or treat one differently than the other, okay? So God's justice, his judgment is just. It is fair. It is without partiality. It's without favoritism. It's without false standards. Now, think back. I referenced the Code of Hammurabi, that ancient code, okay? Punishments in the Code of Hammurabi for someone assaulting someone of a lower class were far lighter than if they had assaulted someone of an equal or higher class, all right? So if a master hurt a slave, there would still be punishment for it, but it wouldn't be nearly as bad as if it were the other way around, where a slave hurt a master. Okay, that's essentially what that's saying. So even in this code of ethics, right, this ancient code, there's partiality, there's favoritism, right? There's not justice in that, right? Because somebody of what was supposedly a lower class would be punished more severely for the same crime than somebody of a higher class. Okay, American justice is not really any better. All right, honestly, I was just joking a second ago about the prison system, okay? American justice violates its own standards every day, all right? Think about this. If a homeless person on the streets in self-defense killed somebody, all right, he's going to go to jail, all right? And he probably isn't going to have any money to post his bail, right? If the judge even says you can have bail, right? Bail, you can pay money and get out of jail. You're still under house arrest and stuff like that, right? But you can at least not be in a prison cell, okay? A homeless man has no possibility of that being a reality, right? He's going to live in prison until he's got some lawyer represent him, and he's probably going to lose his case, all right? If a football player, right, in self-defense, theoretically, because it's usually not the way, all right, kills somebody, goes to jail, he's got tons of money. He has no problem paying to get out of prison in that moment, right? So my point is simply this, all right? The systems that we have are not perfect. While they stab at justice, right? Stab at justice. Okay. While they try to get there, they ultimately fall short. All right. But God is perfect in His justice. All right. Grayson, do you have a question? Okay. God is perfect in His justice, unlike man. All right. So, in answer to our first question, which is why must God judge sin? Can I just say because He's the only one who can really do it. Right. He's the only one who can really do it. He's the only one whose justice is really perfect, equitable, and fair, right? If we want to be judged by the world systems, good luck, right? Because they're imperfect, they're broken. I would much rather be judged by a holy and righteous God who is honest, right? Who's equitable in His dealings, who's fair, okay? That's one concept here. Now, I don't want to fall under God's judgment at all, but that being said, the second thing is this. He says, we know. He says, do you assume or suppose, right? He talks about the day of wrath. Then he says it will be revealed. He will render. There will be. Does this sound uncertain at all to you? Maybe one day God is going to make all things better. Maybe God one day is going to judge wicked people. Does that sound at all uncertain to you? It's a maybe? No, right? It's a certainty. He's talking about a specific appointed day where God is going to judge mankind for their wrongdoing. And ultimately what it comes down to is this. What's the judgment according to? To His works. All right. Now, if you're following along with this, right, and you're thinking through this, okay, do I want to be judged by my works? As a Christian, do I want to be judged by my works? Why not? Go ahead. I would not have eternal life. I am not going to survive that judgment, you guys, if it's according to my works. So why is this good news? Whose works are going to be judged for me? Jesus. All right. here's the beauty of this, you guys. Okay, God is fair, right? God is perfectly fair in this judgment, right? He's going to judge each person according to their works, all right? But who stands in our place as Christians when that judgment comes? Jesus stands in my place, right? His works are perfect, right? He completed all righteousness for me. And so he stands in my place at the judgment and says, no, I covered this one. This one's mine, okay? Guys, that is so beautiful, right? Because every human being ultimately stores up wrath for themselves. That's what it says in verse 5, right? You are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of judgment if you are not found in Jesus Christ, right? If you are not saved by Jesus Christ, all right? So the question is, for each one of us, by whose works are we going to be judged? Are we going to be judged by our works? Because that's going to be bad, okay? Or am I going to be judged by the works of Jesus Christ, okay? Which is going to save me, okay? So here's the final thing that I'll say to you guys tonight, and that's this. Though God will judge sin, though it is inevitable, right? Though it is just, though it is according to works, all that kind of stuff, right? God, the balancing aspect of God's justice is that he's also gracious and merciful, right? He is a gracious and merciful God. That's actually a resounding theme of the whole Bible. Repeatedly you will hear guys like Jonah say, I knew you were a God slow to anger, right? A God gracious, full of steadfast love, right? And that you relent over disaster. That's a repeated phrase that's used in the Bible, okay? And Cain, we see he cries out for mercy, okay? What he says in verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you've driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. And Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. All right. Cain is like, I can't, I'm afraid. This is too much for I can bear, right? And God says, no, I will give you in parting, right? A mark of protection, right? And if anybody sees that, I don't know what it looked like. Maybe it was a big ugly scar that would scare people away. Maybe it was Harry Potter. I don't know. But he said, nobody's going to attack you, right? Because I've placed my protection on you, right? So even in that judgment, God is gracious and merciful. How much more is God gracious and merciful to those who are his children, all right? God is gracious and merciful, and he loves us, all right? So that's the long and short of why God must judge sin, all right? Because he's holy, because he hates sin, and because he is just. But in his judgment, you guys, and this I'm sort of skipping ahead, right? Because in the book of Genesis, we see sort of just glimmers of his grace and his mercy. And it's not until we see, a little later on, right, the fact that God is developing his plan and he's promising the Savior more and more thoroughly throughout the pages of the Old Testament, that Jesus is the one who's going to come, that he is full of grace and truth, that he brings hope to the lost people, right? And if we place our faith in him, then, ultimately, we don't have to face the judgment of God for our wrongdoings anymore. Does that make sense? You guys with me on that? Okay. Again, we could talk hours and hours and hours about that. We won't do that tonight. But that's our conversation for this evening. So let's pray. Let's close, and then we'll break up into our recap group. So Lord Jesus, thank you so much for tonight.